So there are 3 super jazz standards that when you learn these jazz standards and really dig into them and get really good at playing them, you essentially make every other jazz standard exponentially easier to play. That's because within these jazz standards are super essential lessons and concepts that play out in hundreds of other jazz standards. So in this video, I'll reveal what those 3 jazz standards are, as well as the secrets within them that will help you improve as a jazz musician exponentially faster. Let's dig into it. Hey, Brent Varstra here from Learn Jazz Standards. Before we go over the 3 super jazz standards, it's important to know that I'm excluding from this the 2 important song forms that exist in jazz called the blues and rhythm changes. To me, these are separate things that you also really do need to focus on. They're essentials to jazz and jazz improvisation. So make sure to learn lots of jazz blues and rhythm changes heads and really study those song forms a lot. But these jazz standards are gonna help with all the other jazz standards you're gonna wanna work on. Okay, so jazz standard number 1 is Autumn Leaves. So let's take a look at the chords of Autumn Leaves over here. The melody is super important, obviously, and there's a lot of great melodic information in there, but it's the harmonic side that really is gonna help us pull in a lot of important stuff. So first we start with 3 chords, C minor 7, F7, and then B flat major 7. Sounds like this. Okay, now these 3 chords are so important. They're the most important chords that you can find, at least a sequence of chords that you can find in all of jazz standards. So pay attention here because this is really huge. What we have here is what's called a 2-5-1 chord progression, specifically a major 2-5-1 chord progression, because the chord that we are resolving to here is B flat major, okay? B flat major 7. In jazz, we use 7th chords as the default chord. Preceding that is this 2 chord, okay, minor, and then F7 is the 5 chord. And what you should really understand about really any kind of music is that 5 always goes to 1, okay? So 2-5-1, and it has this beautiful harmonic sequence, especially if they're nicely voice led together, okay? This is happening all the time in jazz. So if you master the major 2-5-1, you're in really good hands, right? Like if you get that down, you're gonna see that come up in a lot of other jazz standards. So that's the first place to pay attention to. Now the next chord we have is this E flat major 7, okay? So we have a 2-5-1, then E flat major 7. Now, there's a lot of different ways that people like to analyze Autumn Leaves. For example, the parent key here is really G minor, okay? Which we'll talk about in a second, okay? But I like to really view these first 4 bars of Autumn Leaves as in the key of B flat major. I'll expand on that in a second. So this would be the 4 chord, right? The 4 chord of B flat major. If we're doing the diatonic series, right? Just going through the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, and then the 4 chord is E flat major 7. What we're dealing with here is just simple diatonic harmony, meaning in a key center. So getting used to knowing what the 4 chord is, what the 3 chord is, what the 7 chord is, all that stuff in a key center are other important lessons, especially when it comes to learning tunes and wanting to understand them quickly. In fact, this is really the secret where jazz musicians who have really good ears, have learned a lot of songs, even if they don't know a song at a jam session, if they can hear it a few times through or even one time through, they can hear the patterns going on and fill in the blanks with their understanding of chordal harmony and Roman numeral analysis to quickly understand how to play that song. Okay, then coming up next, we have 3 more very important chords, so pay attention here. A minor 7 flat 5, D7, and G minor 7, okay? And it sounds like this. Okay. Now, oftentimes this is actually played as a G minor 6, okay, like in the Miles Davis recording, so that's something to note here. But for the sake of understanding this harmony here, this is, I mean, you could call the second most important chord progression, but it's really, equal to that of the major 2-5-1, and that is the minor 2-5-1. Okay, the minor 2-5-1. In this case, it's in the key of G minor, okay? Now, minor 2-5-1s, similarly to the major 2-5-1, are gonna be found all of the time in jazz. So once you start seeing this pattern, you'll understand it, right? And this goes back to harmonizing minor scales with 7th chords. In the case of minor harmony, a little trickier because you got the natural minor scale, the melodic minor scale, the harmonic minor scale. But what you should know about jazz harmony in general is that the 2 chord is always going to be half diminished, okay? That would be spelled root, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7, okay? And once again, the 5 chord is always gonna be a dominant 7th chord, and the 5 always goes to 1. It always resolves to 1. So 2, 5, 1. Now, depending on how you harmonize the scale, sometimes that 1 chord might be a minor major 7, for example. We're harmonizing the melodic minor scale, but just by default, we just go with a basic regular minor 7th chord, which would be the harmonization if you were harmonizing the natural minor scale. Now, if all this harmonization, scales, all that stuff is confusing you, just boil it down here to what are the 2 most important chord progressions in all of jazz. It's the major 2-5-1 right up here with B flat major, and it's the minor 2-5-1 over there with G minor. Now, one other really important concept here with Autumn Leaves is this idea of relative keys, right? I have here relative major, and this is minor. This is actually what we call the parent minor. Parent minor meaning that is the key of the song. Now, B flat and G minor share the exact same key signature, right? We'll pull up a picture here of the circle of fifths. On the circle of fifths, if you take a look at it, you can see that both B flat major and G minor share the same key signature. There's 2 flats in the key signature. It's B flat and E flat, okay? So this is a really important concept that comes up a lot in jazz, where you're gonna have a sequence like in Autumn Leaves, where you have a 2-5-1, in this case, the relative major, right? So we're not actually starting in G minor, right? It's 2-5 to the relative major of G minor, and then a 2-5 into the parent minor. Now, sometimes this goes the other way around. You might have a situation where you start out with a 2-5 in the parent, major or the parent minor, and then you'll do a 2-5 into the relative minor or the relative major, right? So that's also a sequence that happens a lot in jazz. That's just how this works out in Autumn Leaves. So automatically right here, we're learning not only the 2 most important chord progressions in all of jazz, we're also learning and understanding the idea of relative keys. This is gonna help us memorize chord progressions a lot faster when we're able to put names to this stuff and see these patterns emerge. You'll look at a jazz standard right away and go, oh, okay, so I don't have to think about every single chord individually. I can just think of, okay, parent major or parent minor going to the relative key, right? 2-5-1 into the relative key. This happens all the time. Now, here's the great thing about Autumn Leaves. This tune is pretty much just this over and over and over again. Really, it's just 2-5-1 major, 2-5-1 minor, relative keys. So if you really master Autumn Leaves, you really study this tune, really get deep inside of it, you master those 2-5-1s, you understand relative keys, automatically you're gonna look at any other jazz standard and go, okay, I think I get this now. Now, another cool thing about Autumn Leaves to keep in mind is because it's such a simple tune, because it's just really 2-5-1 major, 2-5-1 minor, it's easy to transpose this, right? For example, let's just say we transpose this whole thing into the key of C minor, right? So if we're in the key of C minor, what will be the relative major to C minor? Well, it would be E flat major. So 2-5-1 in E flat major is F minor 7, B flat 7, E flat major 7. Then Autumn Leaves goes 2-5 to the parent minor, right? So 2-5 to C minor, which is D minor 7 flat 5, G7, C minor. So now check this out. Even if you took Autumn Leaves into 3 different keys, now all of a sudden you're going, okay, now I know what my 2-5-1s are in these different keys, the minor and the major. Now imagine if you had the capacity to learn it all 12 keys, okay? So now you see where this is going. That's how powerful Autumn Leaves can be and why you should really focus on learning it and studying it. All right, super jazz standard number 2 is All the Things You Are. Okay, so this is where things get really good. All the Things You Are is perhaps my favorite jazz standard, and the reason that is not only because I love the melody, not only because, of course, I love the chords, but I really love, especially as a teacher, all of the things inside of here that open up a whole new world. It's like going from Autumn Leaves is level 1, All the Things You Are is level 2, right? Okay, now you could argue that there's other songs that are less complicated than All the Things You Are, but this takes the concept of the 2-5-1 to a whole other level. The first thing I like to draw people's attention to, instead of looking at the sea of chords, it's a lot of chords, I'll be honest with you. I like to look at key centers, and that's where this color coding comes in. So in blue, we have the key of A flat. In green, we have the key of C major here. In red, we have the key of E flat major, and then we have the key of G major over here, and then we have the key of E major, right? Now, count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 5 different keys that all the things you are goes through. So all of a sudden the level goes up a little bit because we're not just dealing with the relative major and the parent minor anymore. Now we're dealing with 5 different keys completely. But check out the cool patterns that happen here. Okay, so the first 4 chords here that we have is F minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7. That's a 6, 2, 5, 1. And then we'll go ahead 1 to 4, right? We saw that happen in Autumn Leaves too, right? The 1 to the 4, right? In this case, we're in E flat major, and that's a D flat major 7. So it sounds like this. We have F minor 7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, and then the A flat major 7, and then D flat major 7, right? So if you take a look at it, there's only one difference from the way Autumn Leaves starts, and that's with this chord here, the F minor 7, starting on the 6th chord, okay? So the 6, 2, 5, 1 is another important chord progression that you'll see come up quite often in jazz, and then we finish it off with a 4 chord. Now, another concept here that you need to be aware of and you need to understand that's happening in jazz all of the time is something called cycle of fourths. Cycle of fourths. Remember this because this is happening all the time in jazz harmony, including with the 2-5-1, right? But we'll start with the 6 here. So we have an F minor 7, okay? Now an F jumping to a B flat, if we look at that intervallically, that's an interval of fourths, right? And then from B flat to E flat, that's an interval of a fourth. From E flat to A flat is an interval of a perfect fourth. And then finally from A flat to D flat is an interval of perfect fourth, okay? So cycle of fourths. This is what happens a lot in jazz harmony, and now all we're doing is we're extending that pattern that the 2-5-1 has with it. Okay, then we get to our first key center change. Now remember what we said before, 5, right? In this case, G7 always goes to 1, which is C major 7, okay? 5 to 1. So when we understand 5 to 1, 5 to 1, we understand tension and resolution. When we get good at improvising at 5 to 1 resolutions, we get good at playing jazz, right? Because that's happening all the time. Sometimes we just put a 2 in front of it. Sometimes we put a 6, 2, 5 in front of it, but 5 always goes to 1. And jazz musicians are really good at figuring out how to make that 5 sound really messy, really dirty, sometimes lots of tension, and make it resolve to something really cool sounding, right? Really stable. Okay, then we have that pattern here. Now let's look at starting at bar 9 right here. This is where things get really interesting to me, okay? So pay attention, follow along here. We have another pattern that we've seen before. 6, 2, 5, 1, 4. Ah, okay. 6, 2, 5, 1, 4. That's exactly what happened up here, right? Except for in this case, we were in the key of A flat major, and in this case, we're in the key of E flat major, right? And so it sounds like this. C minor 7, 6, F minor 7, 2, B flat 7, 5, E flat major 7, 1, and then A flat major 7, 4, okay? Cool. So once you understand, again, cycle of fourths, and you can transpose that into another key, you know, all the things you are becomes a little bit simpler to understand. Awesome, awesome. So we're going places here. We're starting to understand this a little bit better. Now, taking a look here, now we have this transition to a G major. Now, in this case, there's a 2 in front of this 5, right? Just like there was over here to the C major, now we're just adding a 2. So now it's A flat major 7 to A minor 7, D7, G major 7, okay? Now, something interesting too to look at here is, let's go back up to the first 8 bars. When we look at the relationship between A flat and C major, you can think of it as being a key a major third away, right? Because you have A flat and then a major third away is C major. Well, same thing is happening down here, right? In the key of E flat over here, you have E flat and then, you know, a major third away is G major, right? So when you start to understand these patterns, it makes a lot more sense. All right, then we have a lot of 2-5-1 in the bridge right here, which is starting here with the G major. We have a lot of 2-5-1 right here, 2-5-1 in G major, okay? Again, there's that 2-5-1. Then we have that 5th key center we talked about in E major, and it's just a 2-5-1. So you see how important the 2-5-1 is, guys, right? I mean, because really this whole song, if you look at it, is 2-5-1s or 5-1s with maybe a 4 chord in there, maybe a 6 chord in there, right? And that's really it. That's what this whole song is. This is a little bit of a roller coaster of a song. Once you understand it this way, you start to understand the power of the 2-5-1. You start to understand the power of extending that 2-5-1 with the 6. You start to understand how to switch into different key centers, right? Because that happens in jazz a lot. You're not always going to stay in one key center, right? In fact, jazz loves to move into different key centers. So you have to get good at switching from A flat to C, E flat to G, G to E, right? That happens sometimes. And so this is the song that is the ultimate here. Now, the other thing I like about this song is where with Autumn Leaves, we talked about, hey, this is a good one to take maybe in all 12 keys. You could do something ambitious like that with all the things you are for sure. But more important is the song itself is kind of caked in this exercise, right? And you're like kind of lifting these weights of playing in different keys. So getting really good at all the things you are is like getting really good at playing in 5 different keys, and not only getting good at playing in 5 different keys, but getting good at transitioning from one key to the next, which is a challenge you will have to face in jazz, okay? So all the things you are is another super jazz standard that you really should focus on and spend a lot of time working with. Super jazz standard number 3 is Alone Together. Okay, so Alone Together, great song, especially when we're talking about the study of playing in minor keys, right? Now, we know that in music in general, there's lots of songs in major keys and there's lots of songs in minor keys. And in jazz, it's no different, right? You have lots of songs in minor keys and lots of songs in major keys. And sometimes I find with more amateur jazz musicians is that they might be really good at playing in a major key, but when it comes to a minor key, they're a little bit deficient, right? Especially when it comes to these minor 2-5-1s. Now, let's take a look here at the chords to Alone Together. So in this case, we start here on the 1 chord. We start here on D minor 7, right? Now cue the blues, right? Right? All kinds of good stuff you can start playing over Alone Together, because next it's followed up by a 2-5-1. Okay, we've seen that before, right? In a 2-5-1, minor 2-5-1, E minor 7 flat 5, A7, D minor 7. Right? All kinds of chances and opportunities to play. Right, all kinds of different minor ideas, altered ideas, bluesy ideas. It's all in there. Blues is going to sound really good over top of Alone Together because, again, we continue on with a 2-5-1, and then we have a 2-5-1 in a new key. We have a 2-5-1 in the key of G minor. So it's A minor 7 flat 5, D7, and then G minor. Now, G minor is the 4 chord of D minor. Now, this is where we talked about an important song form in jazz is the blues. And so in the blues, we have the major blues, you could call it the major blues, and you have the minor blues. The minor blues, which is really, this is really essentially what the minor blues is the way Alone Together starts right here, is you have the key of D minor, 2-5-1, 2-5-1, and then a transition to the 4 chord with a 2-5-1, okay? So we're getting really good here at blues right here, the minor blues chord progression. And we're getting really good at playing minor 2-5-1s, transitioning from the 1 to the 4 chord, which is something that happens a lot in jazz standards. So once you get good at that pattern and understanding how that works, that's going to make sense a lot more, okay? So this is where things start getting a little bit funny with Alone Together, even things that may seem like they don't happen in other jazz standards, but indeed they do, or at least similar things do happen. Okay, then we have this B minor 7, E7. This is a part that goes, okay, and it goes B minor 7, E7. Okay, now this is a 2-5 of 5, okay, a 2-5 of 5. That's where we start getting to more complicated understandings of jazz harmony, music harmony, understanding that this E7 is what's called a secondary dominant, okay? Secondary dominant means it is tonicizing another chord in the key of the song, in this case, the 5 chord. So if we were to say E7 is a 5 of what chord, we would say A major 7. Well, in this case, it's tonicizing the 5 of 5, the 5 chord of D minor, which is an A7. It's a funny concept, but it does come up quite a bit in jazz. Now, the thing about this chord progression here, these 2 chords, is it also does something that happens in jazz quite a bit, is it doesn't resolve. So we call these deceptive cadences, where you have these chord progressions that, you know, almost seem like they're gonna go somewhere, and then they go a completely different direction. And that different direction here is a 2-5-1 of F major 7. So B minor 7, E7, G minor 7, C7, F major 7. Okay, so the challenge here becomes, well, how do you improvise over a B minor 7, E7, but then somehow get to a G minor C7, F major 7, right? So what do? You loop these 3 bars over and over and over again so that you can figure out as many melodic resolutions as possible and understand that this absolutely does happen, or these kinds of things do happen in other jazz standards quite often. Okay, the next interesting thing that does happen a lot in other jazz standards is what's coming up next here. So then we have this E minor 7, A7. Okay, now that looks like a minor 2-5, right? Because the 2 chord, remember, is a half diminished chord, a minor 7 flat 5 chord in a minor key. But look, it resolves to a D major 7th chord, 1, the 1 chord, right? So a 1 major chord. Now, I've called these before hybrid 2-5s, meaning like part of it is a minor 2-5 and then another part is major. But also a more theoretical term for what's happening here is modal interchange. You know, this chord should technically be a D minor 7th chord, right? Based on the E minor 7 flat 5, A7, but instead it's a D major 7. So modal interchanges, we're simply borrowing from a different mode, right? And so now we're playing, instead of the D minor, we're playing D major instead, okay? I call these hybrid 2-5s. And this happens quite a bit in jazz. It happens in other songs like What Is This Thing Called Love, right? So you want to be aware of how do you improvise and how do you play these hybrid 2-5s, right? And get used to playing that. Now, if you need help learning jazz standards by ear, so maybe learning the melody and eventually learning the chords, I want to share with you a really great system for doing that by checking out my free guide. It's called Learn Jazz Standards the Smart Way. So if you've never downloaded that before, it's completely free, has a really simple 4-step process for learning songs by ear, learning jazz standards, helping you understand this stuff and what's going on, as well as there's a free masterclass I throw in there as well. So I'll leave that in the link in the description down below or up here on the screen right now. All right, my friends, if you like this video, you found it helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.